I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we take a deep dive behind the headlines to cover news stories that the mainstream media would probably really rather not know anything about, where we try to recover some lost history, and we try to explain the inexplicable. Joining us today to explain the inexplicable, I think, or at least take a shot at it, is Ray Donovan. And Ray is the former Director of Operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. Thank you for taking time to join us, Ray.
My pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Ray, you played an important part. You provided critical testimony to the House Committee on the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, talking about their involvement and their role in the threat of fentanyl to the country. Give us an overview. What did you do? What did you explain to the committee? How did you frame up the China threat?
So we wanted to explain to the committee the actual role that the PRC and the CCP played in the entire opioid epidemic. And so in particular, where we really revealed to not only the select committee, but to America, is the fact that the Chinese government plays a direct role, not only in the production and manufacturing and exportation of fentanyl and fentanyl derivatives and other Schedule I drugs into the Western Hemisphere, directed towards the United States, but also their direct role in those chemical companies themselves. Whether it's through subsidies or it's through tax rebates or awards, or even having CCP members as executives on many of these boards and these companies that exist, that are exporting just tons of chemicals into Mexico with the final destination of the United States.
Right, and what a lot of people don't realize is that all these so-called Chinese companies are not companies in the sense that Americans think about companies. They're all arms of, or sort of action directorates of the central government. These are not for-profit, regular stock-holding U.S. companies. These are arms of the Chinese government that are directed by them. They exist only with the permission of the government, and they're all essentially government employees doing the bidding of what the central committee of the Communist Party wants done. So this is national strategy for the Chinese. This is not a couple of bad guys doing bad stuff on the margins. This is directed from way up on high.
Yeah, I think this is drug warfare, right? And so it is directed towards the United States to undermine not only our economy through the black illicit currency and the global money laundering apparatus that they established, but it's also tearing at the fabric, the social fabric of America. And so it has multiple purposes. It does generate billions of dollars for them, right? But at the same time, it is also going directly at American society.
So yesterday in the New York Post, there's a headline, this very kind of all-American girl, 19 years old, smiling face, bright kid, good future. And this 19-year-old girl, borrows or gets a Percocet that's not a Percocet from a friend, and of course it's fentanyl. And bang, she's dead. And this is happening all over the country. There's innumerable cases of it. I did a documentary with Sarah Carter, who I'm sure you know from Fox News. Back in 2018, Sarah and I did a documentary together on fentanyl based upon some nightmare stories out of Ohio. And this is occurring in communities all over the country. The House Committee put out a video, and they used an example, frankly, that I used in 2017, 2018, about crashing a 737 every day and no one giving a damn about it. So what's the pain threshold? You've done what you've done for 28 plus years at the DEA. Congress puts out this report. We have people dying at a rate of, 120,000 a year plus. And those are the ones that are kind of tracked back and diagnosed. It's more than that.
Right.
What's the pain threshold? At what point do people say enough? This is insane.
Right. I mean, it's a great point, Chris. I mean, for us in DEA, we've been driving this to the public for many, many years.
Yeah.
Without getting any real kind of recognition or support. I think once we started bringing in all these families that were directly impacted, losing loved ones, as the young lady that you just mentioned,
Yep.
it really started pushing it out nationally. But it still hasn't slowed this epidemic down because it's part of a much larger intention, right? It's part of the Chinese government's role in wanting to continue to support these Mexican cartels to produce fentanyl and then push it across the border. Look, it's not only China, it's also Mexico.
Sure.
It's also our relationship with Mexico. And I talked about during my hearing the 5 points, right? The 5 points for me are production in China, the ports in Mexico, the clandestine laboratories that are in Mexico, the border, and then the social media platforms being the vehicle for distribution today. So, we've been over 100,000 American lives being lost every year for several years now.
Correct.
And so where do we go from here? My hope was that the hearing would really put a huge spotlight on it, and finally we're going to take action and put a lot more pressure than we are against China, but also Mexico, to really hold all these people accountable, because American lives are being lost daily, and it's a problem, and it's not going away because it's synthetic. And I think that's the issue, Chris.
Yeah. So I want to get your take on this, because some people thought it was incredibly controversial. I didn't. And during the last Trump era, I advocated very strongly for the cartels to be designated as foreign terrorist organizations, because I'm telling you, you know this better than I do. We know down to the grid coordinates where a lot of these labs are. And you could put up a drone and just do hellfire strikes and eliminate these labs. It would be enormously disruptive. And there was people balked. They said, oh, we can't do that. Mexico would get upset. We'd be violating their sovereignty. I mean, there's 101 reasons why they don't want to do it. I'm not persuaded by that, frankly, but maybe that's me. Maybe I'm just a crazy person and I'm way too aggressive. Why not designate them as foreign terrorist organizations, and why not militarily strike them?
So I'm going to tell you the pros and cons for it, right? The pros are pretty obvious. You just spoke to it, Chris. So the pros are, you have Mexican cartels that, believe it or not, and we know this for a fact, are very influential in politics.
Sure.
And who's going to support, who's going to rise up, bribing officials at the lowest levels, staying with them as they rise up through the government. We know that is modus operandi for the cartels.
And frankly, that's on both sides of the border, too. It's a very controversial thing to say, but it's true.
Well, I mean, for us, we've seen this for many, many years. So it's nothing new for DEA to recognize that. We know corruption is the issue in Mexico at every level, right? We know that the cartels are often intertwined with officials in Mexico. So that's why when I look at the much broader problem, I don't want to just say it is China. It is China, but it's also Mexico. And I want to be very clear about that.
Yeah, I mean, the point of contact is the Mexican border. That's the point of contact. There's a background to it. I get it, but the place where it happens is that border. So
the con and the pushback on designating the cartels and their higher ups as terrorists is that I heard would be, okay, at what point, what cost? So here's the concern. The concern was you have thousands upon thousands of cartel affiliates in the United States. Many of them are American citizens. So at what point do you say, okay, the cutoff that you're no longer a terrorist? Because you can literally go from production, fentanyl, let's just say fentanyl or meth production in Mexico, all the way down to distribution on any street across America. That money's going back to the cartel. Where is the terrorism designation end?
Right.
And so that was the pushback. Now, my personal opinion is this. When you look at the cartel and you look at how strong and how much they control and they continue to control many Mexican states, we have to look at it differently, right? It is a matter of national security. This is no longer just a matter of criminal elements or criminal gangs, criminal cartels that have infiltrated the United States Our border is a huge issue. But beyond that, I'll give you an example, Chris. Back in 2015, 2016, working with Mexico, we were taking down 100 fentanyl labs a year, or 100 clandestine labs. It wasn't only fentanyl, it was meth, it was heroin, but we were engaging with our counterparts, okay? As soon as AMLO came to power in December of 2018, that dropped down to single digits.
Right, hugs, not guns, right?
Right. So he adapted that philosophy, immediately changed our ability to coordinate and operate directly with our counterparts in Mexico. And what happened? Fentanyl production started going through the roof, and seizures in Mexico started dropping. And so, this policy of hugs and not guns really transformed our ability to share intelligence with our counterparts in Mexico. And what's the impact of that? The impact is you see more and more people dying, not only in the United States, but also in Mexico itself.
Yeah, and you have other problems even here domestically, right? So you have like this, he's no longer there, but the guy who was the prosecutor, the DA in San Francisco, this maniac, Chase Bowden, whatever his name was, he was the son of these Weather Underground terrorists back in the 1960s. And he's sitting in San Francisco. He decriminalizes everything, right? So San Francisco becomes an open-air drug market, essentially. And so you can go out to San Francisco and do slow motion suicide on the street there, and you will be assisted in that with medical care, food, housing, et cetera. So when you have guys like that who are proactively destroying one of the greatest cities in the country, the appetite on our side of the border is voracious, right? The only reason they're able to sell all this stuff is because we have so many people in so many horrific states of addiction that they're consuming it like maniacs, and they're destroying themselves. So that's on the math on this, the other half of the equation that we're not always happy to talk about is if there wasn't so many Americans taking drugs, right?
Yeah, but that's true. I mean, yes, there's a demand, but let me say something about that, because I was the special agent in charge in New York City when the bail reform law took effect in 2020, and immediately before that, right, it was known as the biggest, safest city in the Western Hemisphere, right? It had a great reputation. Streets were clean. As soon as the bail reform law took effect, the downward slide started going.
Right.
So you had so many people that, it started the erosion of the rule of law, right, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And it wasn't, obviously, it's not only New York, it's many other major cities, metropolises throughout the United States, where you're not upholding and holding criminals accountable. It's where I saw a shift in who the victims are. We went from looking at the actual victims of crimes to now saying the perpetrators are victims, right? And a complete dichotomy of our system and how we look at crime. And so, that's that. There, of course, there is looking at American demand and looking at our cities and not willing to hold people accountable is an issue that has to be addressed, because the vast majority of citizens just want to feel safe. Yeah. It's a fundamental thing.
Right. So today's your lucky day. We're going to make you dictator for the day, and you're in charge. You get to do whatever the hell you want, and you don't have to worry about all the niceties of passing legislation and blah, blah, blah. You get to say, look, King Ray is in charge. We're going to break this. We're going to fix this drug problem once and for all. What are you going to do?
First and foremost is shut down production of fentanyl coming out of China, exporting into the Western Hemisphere. That's an immediate impact. I'm going to give you a reason why that is, Chris. When Wuhan, Hubei in China, during the lockdown of COVID, shut down, we saw an immediate impact into Mexico, precursor chemicals going in there.
Right.
So we know production is absolutely critical to transforming the entire illicit drug trade. That's the first, right? Second is going into Mexico. It goes right to what I said earlier. There are key points or choke points that if we impacted them and changed them, we'd see an immediate impact overall in the entire drug trade. Not only synthetic drugs, the entire drug trade, right? So I said the ports, wide open, Mexico, controlled by the cartels, right? We don't know what goes in, what goes out.
Right.
The laboratories, the hundreds, if not thousands of clandestine laboratories, focus there because that's where the chemicals are transformed into fentanyl and methamphetamine, and obviously the border. Big deal is the border. We have to tighten up the border. We know that there's so many drugs coming in through the ports of entries. There's so much more we could do. We're always trying to balance commerce versus national security as it relates to trade across the border, north and south. Then finally, I would hold those social media platforms accountable. Take a hard look at their platforms and what they're allowed to do, and look at the laws guiding them, and really hold them accountable, because it is the means of trafficking and distribution today. And they know it, by the way.
So the other thing I want to touch on, and you probably, I know for a fact you got to know this, but I want to just highlight it to people. The Department of the Treasury can do some very aggressive, very targeted actions against international financial transactions banking, against persons and organizations that would completely disrupt the cartels, the Chinese, the shipping companies, if they wanted to. And
Right.
they have the financial intelligence to do this. I know they do. They could target, I don't know, pick 20 people, 20 organizations, LLCs, whatever, companies, 20 shipping operations in China and in Mexico, and it would have an immediate, incredibly disruptive effect because these guys couldn't access or move their money. You know this and I know this, correct?
Yeah, yes, sanctioning companies is absolutely a viable means to disrupting their ability to move money. It is one of the tactics that is deployed by Treasury, by law enforcement, in conjunction with Treasury, to really go after these bad actors. I think that there's more that could be done in that space.
Yeah.
I certainly think, so here's the challenge, Chris. The challenge with that is you can have identified, 100 chemical companies that are major fentanyl brokers and manufacturers exporting tons of fentanyl into the Western Hemisphere. And this has happened numerous times. You identify them, you sanction them, they just pivot, shut down, reopen, rename, re-register, re-everything. But what doesn't change is the banks and the supporting banks and the flow of money. And I think if the U.S. targets and looks at those banks that they're utilizing to move money from China into Mexico worldwide, there's an area there that we can put a lot more financial pressure on these organizations and really kind of hold them accountable.
That, to me, the financial squeeze, using the financial intelligence to go after these organizations. And like you said, you don't even necessarily have to go after the actual bad guys. You could lean on the banks that you know are moving the money and say, we are going to freeze you out. You're going to be out of business. You want to see people snap to? You have my attention now. Of course I'll cooperate with you. I mean, it's like that. I mean, in the world of terrorism, and this is in a related area, in the world of terrorism, Hezbollah, and I know that this is a crossover to DEA, Hezbollah loves making money to finance their operations, right? I think it's sort of the Lebanese ethnic streak in them, right? They want to be smart about how they're doing their bad business. They want to engage in contraband or in these criminal activities, but they want to make a buck while they're doing it. So it's craziness plus profit incentive. I have very good information that there's a counterfeiting operation run by Hezbollah in Juarez, Mexico, down near the airport on a street called Waterfill. It's a big warehouse. Everybody in the world has known about this counterfeiting operation literally for years, and there's been no disruption. Because it's kind of like, well, we know they're there, we know what they're doing. They run a taxi business as the front end, as the commercial front end to move the counterfeit currency. I mean, this is a very sophisticated operation, and I guess somebody somewhere, one of the big brains thinks it's better to know that it's there and let it continue to run and not interdict it. But I see opportunities like that, and where there's no action taken, we are literally shooting ourselves in the foot. And this is Hezbollah. These are like the baddest of the bad, and they let it go.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a good point, how the money flows, right? Because, it brings me back to the Chinese diaspora in Mexico.
Yes.
And so looking at the growth of Chinese influence in Mexico in key cartel cities like Tijuana, like Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico City, DF, or even Culiacan, Sinaloa, we've seen these Chinese companies that are mining companies, money exchange houses, import-export companies being really influential and tied to the billions of dollars of illicit funds from drug trafficking in the United States flowing into Mexico. And so that's a deep concern for us, because it's not only, again, it's not just criminal activities. It goes to a higher cause. It's national security.
It is.
And it continues to grow, and it's not going away, right? We've seen it through the Belt and Road initiatives in the Andean regions of South America. On the front end, we're going to come in, it's all commercial. We're going to build up highways and tunnels, and everything is going to be great. And on the back end, we see drug money flowing into these corporations. And so the Chinese are very adept, skilled at doing this. Similar to what you mentioned, Chris, about the Lebanese. A long history of trade, long history of business.
They're very smart. They're very sharp.
Right. And so for me, what keeps me up at night is seeing that growth and seeing that connection between Chinese organized crime groups. And make no mistakes, we see factions of the triads working with the Chinese government, the PRC and the CCP, working with Mexican cartels. And Mexican cartels working with their dirty officials. So it's a problem for us. If someone to say, well, how do you tackle that? Well, we can't only tackle it on the front end from what I talked about. We have to look at, well, who's the puppet masters pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Yeah, and it's a national issue. It's something we've neglected a lot of Central and South America as far as our foreign policy is concerned. We've let the Chinese come in and flip countries like Honduras, where the Chinese came in and said, hey, look, we'll give you 5G internet, we'll give you a mobile phone system, we'll give you everything you want. The Hondurans say, okay, great. What they don't realize is that the IT and the communications company that moves in, it's the Chinese army. It's a signals intelligence unit. It's not some Chinese company. The Chinese army moves in, and they do. They set up a fabulous 5G internet and cell phone communications company because it's in their interest, and they literally took over an old Spanish fort and set up a Chinese operation. They're not going home. I mean, the Honduran government's not going to go say to them, hey, listen, that's wonderful. We appreciate the investment. We're going to take it over now. We'll pay you off. You go home. The Chinese don't go home. Right. And I mean, our thinking on this is so primitive. It's so naive and juvenile. And there's no attention paid to it. I mean, these people, they run wild, and we're just consumed with whatever nonsense.
Yeah, it's very short term, Chris. We think in terms of, okay, well, what's the next 2-4 years going to look like? While the Chinese are thinking, okay, what's the next 25, 50, 100 years going to look like?
Right.
And our solutions are built around, 2 years, we need to see some kind of impact.
Right.
Their solutions are 25 years, we want to be here,
Right.
It's just a different culture, different mindset. And quite frankly, they are in our backyard. And listen, Chris, to be honest with you, they're all over America now because of the border.
Correct.
Chinese intelligence officers. You had 27,000 Chinese nationals across the border. How many of them are actually intel officers?
A huge number. 113,000 that we know of, that will admit to, probably double that since Biden took office. And I know people on the border that said that the guys who showed up they reek of being military, right? You can look at a guy, you can tell a cop, you can tell a guy in the military like that. The same is true for the Chinese. Very experienced, very smart people I know say that the number of it's not just military-age males, it's military-age males who walk, talk, and act unlike the average slob on the street. These are guys, they're here with a mission.
Well, they have training.
Correct.
Right? They have training. And so that's the real distinction there is that. So if you have a normal person that's trying to come in to America to improve their lives, they're going to say, I made it. What do you need to know? Such and such and such. These encounters with these Chinese nationals, complete shutdown. They're not saying a single thing.
Right.
And so, for me, that gives me a lot of concern. Right? What does that mean? Right? I mean, it's like, okay, again, we talked about what's the long-term impact here. Right? What's the plan of action taking place that we do not know at this moment?
Yeah, let's contextualize this. We got 19 guys on 9/11. You've got 113,000 that they'll admit to, probably double that, but nonetheless, 113,000 Chinese in the last 3 years. What if just 1% of that 113,000? What if just 1% were bad guys?
All right, that's all it takes.
Right?
Yeah, that's all it takes is just that 1%. But we're talking about the border. So yeah, Chinese are a focus for us, but how many other nationals have come into the United States? Look at the arrest that just took place by ICE.
Right, Tajikistani guys.
Tajikistan, right. So for me, it's like, okay, how many of these bad actors, terrorists or terrorist affiliates, intel officers, or criminal networks have made entrance into the United States?
We have no idea who they are. None.
And we have no idea because there's millions of gotaways that had no encounter. So they didn't make it into a database. They didn't make it into a system, and they're here.
Right, they're walking around.
Keep in mind that the cartel utilizes the movement of migrants to go here, and they send drugs there. It's all interconnected, and it's done on purpose. It's like when I said at the hearing, Chris, I think the Chinese have been doing this for many, many years intentionally. This is not something where it's like, okay, yeah, it just happened to be that the chemical industry is the biggest producers of fentanyl in the world. No, they're subsidizing the entire industry with tax rebates, giving them money back, giving them awards, giving them other gifts, just so that they can continue to undermine America.
Ray, I've appreciated your time talking with us today. If folks want to follow what you're doing, your work, want to read what you're up to, how can they follow you? Do you have a website? Do you have a publication?
I would say anyone that's interested in anything that I do, just look me up on LinkedIn. I'm building a website now, and once that's going to be posted there, anything that I could do or any other conversations I may have, please, by all means, reach out there.
And then the House Committee on the CCP, their website is just Google up House Committee CCP. You'll see the report that we started off talking about. They can find your testimony that's posted up there. You can watch a video they've done on how China is controlling fentanyl and really just generally the topics we've covered. And what we'll do is, my guys here, when they produce the show, they'll put links into this stuff so folks can follow up and read more about what we've been talking about.
Appreciate it, Chris.
I'm going to give you the last word. What do our viewers and listeners need to think about or know?
Well, they need to know exactly what the purpose of this conversation is today. And that is that the Chinese government is behind the entire opioid crisis. Bring this to the attention of your politicians. Put pressure on them to the degree that you can. We need to make this a national issue, and we need to take a position as a nation to safeguard American lives.
Ray Donovan, keep fighting the good fight. We appreciate your time today.
Absolutely will, Chris. Thank you.
I'm Chris Farrell on Watch.